Buonasera.
A simple good evening from the newly elected Cardinal Jorge Mario Bergoglio from Argentina, the first pope ever from the Americas. His choice of the name Francis, after the saint known for his poverty and love of nature, had never been used before by a pope, set the tone for a pontificate marked by attention to the poor and a simple way of life. This pope's home would no longer be the historic apartments, but a simple set of rooms in a guest house on the Vatican grounds. Elaborate papal robes and jewellery remained in the closet, as Francis wore only his white cassock, black orthopaedic shoes with a simple pectoral cross. And when he needed his glasses fixed, he hopped in a car and went himself to the optician in Rome. A down-to-earth style learned on the streets of Buenos Aires. The one-time nightclub bouncer took public transportation and always remained a fan of Argentina's San Lorenzo soccer team. His simple words, too, had a way of getting to the heart of divisive issues.
If a person is gay and accepts the Lord and has goodwill, well, who am I to judge?
It didn't change the Catholic Church's opposition to gay marriage, but convinced many that he was a pope open to change. He was a champion of the environment, issuing an encyclical, the highest papal teaching document, to warn of the dangers of global warming and a throwaway consumer culture in the West that damages our climate and the livelihood of the poor.
The
misuse and destruction of the environment are also accompanied by a relentless process of exclusion. In effect, a selfish and boundless thirst for power and material prosperity leads both to the misuse of available natural resources and to the exclusion of the weak.
He drove home the point travelling to the United States, home of gas-guzzling SUVs, in a tiny Fiat. Equally at home with the poor and powerful, on the lawn of the White House, he made a plea for immigrants.
As the son of an immigrant family, I'm happy to be a guest in this country, which was largely built by such families.
And at a time marked by a dramatic refugee crisis in Europe, Francis tirelessly called on governments and people to not close their eyes or their borders. And he walked his talk, bringing back 12 Syrian refugees on his plane following a trip to the Greek island of Lesbos. In the difficult terrain of the Holy Land, Pope Francis prayed at the wall dividing Palestinian West Bank from Jerusalem and embraced his Jewish friends in front of the Wailing Wall. The Pope focused much of his attention to those on the peripheries, as he called it, the outsiders, excluded from society.
The hungry, the thirsty, the stranger, the naked, the sick, those in prison.
He sought to support the churches on those peripheries and far from Rome. The longest foreign trip of his pontificate saw him travel across Southeast Asia and the Pacific, highlighting the importance of this region for the future of the Catholic Church. Going to those on the margins was something Francis himself practiced during many moments of his pontificate. Embracing the disabled, washing the feet of prisoners, installing shower rooms for the homeless around the Vatican.
One of his characteristics, a characteristic of his entire life, was humility.
A humility that attracted the world, with politicians and stars lining up to meet him at the Vatican. He was not so popular at times inside the Vatican and among powerful Catholic groups in the United States. There was a backlash from conservatives upset about his insistence that church teaching must develop, along with his biting critiques of clerical culture. His financial reforms seeking greater transparency faced significant difficulties, and the scandal of sex abuse continuing to be the Catholic Church's biggest struggle. In the case of Chile, Francis admitted in a letter that he too was part of the problem when every bishop in the country offered to resign in the wake of sexual abuse scandals there. Also accused of being part of the problem by his ex-ambassador to the United States, who claimed he told Francis about sexual abuse allegations against former Washington, D.C. Cardinal Theodore McCarrick 5 years before, and Francis allowed him to continue serving.
I will not say one more word on this.
Francis eventually defrocked the US cardinal and held an unprecedented global meeting of bishops to address the issue. A Vatican investigation later called into question the claims made by the former ambassador, who was then barred from receiving communion and put into exile by the Church after he rejected the authority of the Pope and some key Catholic teachings. Nevertheless, questions remained about Francis's handling of the abuse crisis.
There is no doubt that the child sexual abuse scandals are the central stain on his legacy. I mean, over and over again, Pope Francis said the right things. He met with victims. He expressed heartfelt sorrow. He expressed resolve to get this right. But, you know, most critics, many victims, would say that that wasn't matched with a policy follow-through.
When the coronavirus pandemic hit in 2020, the image of the Pope blessing the world from an empty St. Peter's Square became a symbol for that desolate time. Francis urged nations to share their vaccines with poorer countries and vaccinated hundreds of homeless and underprivileged at the Vatican. The following year, during an historic trip to Iraq, the first Pope ever to visit the country, Francis stood on top of the rubble in Mosul, once an ISIS stronghold, and furthered his outreach to the Muslim world by an unprecedented meeting with top Shia Muslim cleric, the reclusive Grand Ayatollah Ali al-Sistani. From the beginning of the war in Ukraine in 2022, Francis was an outspoken advocate for peace. He avoided outright condemnation of Vladimir Putin, but publicly appealed to the Russian president, begging him to stop for the love of his people, the Pope said. Francis spoke several times by phone with Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky during 2022, asking him to be open to serious peace proposals, before the pair met face-to-face at the Vatican in May of 2023 and October 2024. He made similar appeals for peace during the conflict in the Middle East, saying that the Israel-Hamas war had descended into terrorism. He insisted that war is always a defeat and said self-defense that is not proportional is immoral. Francis' most important message was one of fraternity, that we are all brothers and sisters, despite our differences. Take care of the earth and each other, he said, and don't forget to pray for me.
I'm Paula Sandoval in New York, following the breaking news where the Vatican now confirming the death of Pope Francis at 88. For the latest now, let's go to CNN Vatican correspondent Christopher Lamb joining us live with more. Christopher, you just laid out such a legacy right now in that piece. I'm curious if you could just bring our viewers up to speed about what we know.
Well, Paula, we were told this morning that there would be a brief broadcast from the Santa Marta, the residence of Pope Francis, and then a few moments later, Cardinal Kevin Farrell, who is the Carmelengo, the man in charge with overseeing the protocols around the death of the Pope, announced that Pope Francis had died at 7:35 a.m. local time this morning. Now, he was also joined by Cardinal Pietro Parolin and Archbishop Peña Parra, the two senior Vatican officials. They made that announcement from the Santa Marta residence. Now, yesterday, Pope Francis was out in the crowds of St. Peter's, greeting people. He made an effort to get onto the balcony to give the Easter Sunday blessing. Of course, he hasn't been well enough to lead services in the way that he would normally, but it was characteristic of Pope Francis to come out into the square at St. Peter's, clearly not feeling himself. I mean, there were those of us who followed it closely who saw him yesterday and did feel afterwards that he was not in a good condition in terms of he's normally greeting the crowds, he's normally very engaged, he's a pope who loves to be amongst the people, but yesterday he seemed less engaged. He's clearly been through, he was going through the very profound health crisis. He had pneumonia in both of his lungs. He was in hospital for 38 days. He almost died on two occasions, but he came through that and was recovering in the Vatican. But obviously it was very difficult for him health-wise, and he showed, though, determination to keep going until the very end. There was speculation he might resign, but he never did that. He decided he would go on right until the end. I think that's also the ethic and person of Francis, is to serve right until the last moment. He was someone who gave himself totally to the role of Pope. He was a pope who wanted to be amongst the people to serve. He wanted the Catholic Church to do more, to go out to the margins of society, to serve migrants and refugees, the poorest. He said after his election, I want a poor church for the poor. And that was the kind of, that was his kind of manifesto from the very beginning, that he wanted a church that was willing to go out and pitch its tent amongst the most suffering of people, the people who were suffering the most. He wanted a church amongst the people, and a church focused on service and humility.